network, and that's interesting, helps us sustain our network and helps us to create the kind of community that you really want to be part of as you get older. So we want to also thank our sponsors, Triply Construction, Conover Insurance, and our new sponsor, Brunback and Autumn. And we also are so grateful to the Yakima Valley Community Foundation, Latino Community Fund of Washington, and United Way of Central Washington for the grant they gave us during the pandemic. Today, we're so pleased to welcome our presenters from End of Life Washington. Rachel Haxtema is the Community Outreach Coordinator, and Connie Brom is a retired family physician and volunteer with End of Life Washington. And they're going to start their program very soon. We just want to take a minute for Chrissy to do a few logistics and that have to do with making the program go well. So Chrissy, you're on, but you're muted.
I see that now. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here this afternoon. We are going to record our session. We got the thumbs up to do that. So if you don't want to be recorded, you can go to stop video and that you'll be able to see, but your image won't be there during the recording. We ask that you mute during the presentation just so there's unexpected background noise doesn't disrupt the presentation. So we'll do a recording. I'll send out an email and a survey later this evening. So you'll see, and whatever else might be in that email.
That email is going to include a handout from Rachel and Connie.
Yep.
That covers some of the basic materials. So do take notes, but you'll also be able to get a handout that Chrissy will send out afterwards.
Yes.
Thanks, Chrissy.
Okay.
All right. Well, Rachel, do you want to take it away?
Sure, yes. I have to unmute myself first too.
Let's mute ourselves and we'll let you unmute.
Great. Well, thanks again for inviting us and for having us this afternoon. We're really happy to be here. Happy to see you all here on Zoom and excited to share some information that we hope will be valuable to you. So Connie is here to present, and then we have one of our volunteers is also joining. So Becky, Becky, if you want to say your last name, I realized I didn't know how to pronounce your last name properly, but she's listening in from the Spokane area as well to just observe one of our presentations. So thanks for being here, Becky. She's one of our volunteer client advisors. And I'll just let Connie take it away with the presentation, and I'll be here to answer questions at the end or jump in as needed, Connie.
Okay, so are you going to start the screen share? And as has been said a couple times, my name is Connie Brum. I'm a retired family physician and a volunteer client advisor with End of Life Washington. My goal as a volunteer is to help individuals, families, and care providers understand that we have choices as we reach the end of life and to learn how to document and communicate those choices. Sadly, many of my colleagues are not adept at giving patients choices, but we can improve access to information with education. I've recently experienced the difference between one patient with ALS who was given information early and another who was given no information or misinformation almost up until the end. End of Life Washington is growing and is very busy. We provide education and resources to individuals and to groups such as yours. We have over 70 volunteer client advisors to provide support to individuals and their loved ones, and we have a lobbyist to help with work on public policy. I'm going to give an overview of several topics to identify values and choices, how to document them, how to find additional tools and information, and what options might be available to you. I'm also going to tell some stories that illustrate how people made these choices. After each section, I'll pause for 1 or 2 questions for clarification, and we'll have plenty of room for discussion at the end. Some of these topics are difficult to talk about and may bring up feelings and emotions. I encourage you to own those feelings and work with them, and feel free to ask questions. If I leave you with only one message today, it is this: Plan ahead. Plan ahead. Plan ahead. And don't just do it once, but do it every year or at some regular interval. Talk with the people that are close to you and may have to make decisions toward the end of your life. It will ease their burden and their pain as well as your own. It will ensure that you have a support team that agrees with your wishes. Folks that don't plan ahead often experience much more suffering and do not have a good death. One way to start is with a values worksheet. This is a way to understand how you want to be cared for if you were physically or mentally incapacitated. It helps you understand your values about how and where you want to live, how and where you want to be cared for. There are several tools for this, but there's one on our website, and it asks you to rate from very important to not important quality of life issues like being independent or where you want to live and die. Now I'm going to talk about advanced directives or living wills. An advanced directive and a living will are the same thing, just two different terms for the same thing. The most important step to make sure you're treated the way you want to be treated is to have an advanced directive. Every adult should have an advanced directive, healthy or not, young or old. There's two parts to an advanced directive. The first part is a healthcare directive, which gives specific direction on what kind of treatment you may or may not want if you become seriously ill or are unable to speak for yourself. These cover issues like CPR or resuscitation, hospitalization, ICU care, surgery, ventilator support, or tube feeding. The second part of an advanced directive is what's called a durable power of attorney. This is where you legally choose someone to honor your healthcare directive should you become incapacitated. Examples of when you might need an advanced directive are if you have a heart attack or a stroke or a car accident or a skiing accident. It delineates how you want to be treated depending on how severely impacted you are. I repeat, every adult should have a healthcare directive because tragedy can strike at any age. People ask, where do you keep them? They can be kept in your handbag, your backpack, your briefcase, your glove compartment, but most often they're kept somewhere easily accessible in the home. Do not keep them in a safe deposit box because that's not an easily accessible place. Whenever they're updated or changed, just rip up the old ones and give new ones to your care providers or your care team. In order to be legal in Washington, an advanced directive needs to be signed and the signature needs to be either witnessed by two witnesses or to be notarized. Lesser known is the Dementia Care Directive. This clearly defines different levels or different degrees of dementia and allows you to specify what amount of care you wish to receive at each stage of dementia. For example, in the early stages of dementia, you might want full treatments for all illnesses or not. And in the late stages of dementia, you might want no treatment and no hospitalization under any circumstances, and everything in between. You get to choose. Another piece is something called instructions for oral feeding and drinking. So when someone shows no interest in eating or drinking at the end of life, you already have laid out clear instructions for how you want to be cared for. So an advanced directive or a living will might have several parts: a healthcare directive, a durable power of attorney, a dementia directive, and instructions for oral feeding and drinking. When you become seriously ill or are at the end stages of life, you should have a POLST form. POLST stands for Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. Advanced directives are legal documents. A POLST form is a medical document. It's a physician's order, which is signed by a physician, and all EMTs and hospital personnel have to follow it. It specifically delineates what level of treatment you want, such as resuscitation or CPR, intubation, IVs, hospitalization, antibiotics, oxygen. You don't have to be terminal to have a POST form, but it's only really applicable if you have a serious illness or are at the end stages of life. In Washington, a POST form is on this bright green paper that I swear is so bright it glows in the dark. And you're to put it on your refrigerator or your front door. All EMTs, I think across the country, but definitely in the state, are trained to look on the refrigerator first before rendering care. So to review, all adults should have an advance directive, which is a legal document that guides proxy and providers on how you want to be cared for. If you have a serious illness, a POST form would be indicated, and that's a medical order that EMTs and providers must follow. Examples of serious illnesses that would want you to maybe have a POST form are cancer, ALS, Parkinson's disease, dementia, congestive heart failure, or COPD. You always have a choice. You have a choice to accept treatment. You have a choice to refuse treatment. You have a choice to stop treatment. Now, some doctors will say, this is what you got, and this is what you should do about it. Some doctors will say, here are the options: treatment A, treatment B, treatment C. But very few doctors will give you an option of none of the above. And none of the above does not mean nothing. None of the above can give you other choices, such as palliative care or hospice care. There we go. So palliative care can begin at diagnosis, and it can also begin when you're still having treatment for your diagnosis. Hospice care begins after you've stopped treatment and when you have 6 months or less as a life expectancy. But hospice doesn't mean giving up. It means comfort and resources. All of these things mean comfort and resources. And all things being equal, patients on hospice live longer and have more peaceful deaths than patients that are not on hospice.
Do you want to pause here?
Yes, thank
and
you.
See if there's any questions.
I do. That was
about
exactly where I wanted to pause. Thank you, Rachel.
I'll stop the share for a minute just because that was a lot of information.
Yeah, it was. Any questions about about advanced directives or documentation?
I just have a question. If I went on the website, I can get all the forms you just showed, except the green one probably, or can you have it mailed out?
Yep, we can certainly mail them to you physically, or you can download them from our website.
Okay.
And I will send a couple of the things directly to the values worksheet and some basic overview information, but I won't overwhelm you with the longer documents unless you want to access those.
Okay.
All doctors' offices have POST forms, so you can get one there. And there's about 150,000 different advanced directives, I think. There's different ways to do it. And the dementia directive that I was referring to is a very simplified form. There are also more complicated forms. And so you can kind of almost design it to work for you, but rather than just getting one and picking one and using one, I would look at multiples before you decide.
Well, that was my next question. I have all of this done, but I wanted to compare. Especially
yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Can I ask a question, Connie?
Sure.
At what point does a person with dementia have to fill out that form?
I have a dementia directive now, and I'm not demented that I know of.
If I have dementia, once I have dementia, is it too late to fill those forms out?
It's never too late until the point at which someone has declared that you don't have capacity. So if you don't have capacity to like pay your own bills, you don't have capacity to do this.
Okay.
But I think as long as you have capacity to legally sign any legal document, even though you might have mild dementia, that it would probably hold up. But I would encourage you to do it early.
Yeah, but I'm asking because I think there's quite a few people who have a family member with dementia and they didn't know about dementia forms when that started. So I'm trying to figure out what do they need to know about what they can do.
Right.
I
I think it depends
could
on their
talk-
status.
Yeah, and talk to their, they could talk to their own physician, or their family members could talk to their physician about how the physicians understand their decision-making capacity is kind of the phrase that's used for a lot of the legal documents around
Okay.
dementia.
And if they
It's-
don't have decision-making capacity, then what are the options?
It would fall to their durable power of attorney
Okay.
or,
Right. And the other parts of the advanced care directive or the healthcare directive might cover most things.
Okay. That's good to
good
know.
questions.
Yeah.
Well,
great.
we'll have some time at the end for further questions. That's a lot of content about all the forms and documents.
Yeah.
And like I said, we'll send out some of the links and the resources after the presentation.
Okay.
I just wanted to check in. I don't know who's helping with tech, Chrissy, right? It looks like somebody's trying to connect. I don't know if you're helping them. All right, we'll
I
go
see
back to the
George, yeah.
presentation. Okay.
So we've talked about preparing for and documenting choices. And now we're going to talk about end of life options in Washington. These are choices that enable you to hasten your death and die on your own terms. They're not for everyone, but they are legal options for those that choose them. Medical systems are focused on life-sustaining treatments, and medical providers don't want patients to think they're abandoning them or giving up on them. But making the choice, as I said before, of none of the above doesn't mean giving up or doing nothing. In Washington, terminally ill patients with less than a 6-month life expectancy have the option of medical aid in dying to control the timing of their death or to reduce anxiety and suffering. These patients want to live, but they're terminal. Death is inevitable. They're choosing when to die. They're choosing to control the date and the time of their death. Many patients have such success with palliative care and hospice care that 25% of patients who have requested medical aid in dying don't end up using it. Just knowing that that option is there relieves so much anxiety that they don't need it. The Death with Dignity law is very specific. It was passed in Washington in 2008 and is now available in 10 states and Washington, D.C. This covers about 20% of the US population. Those states are California, Colorado, Hawaii, Montana, Maine, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and Washington, D.C. So California is such a large state that that's how we get 20% of the population. In order to qualify for a death with dignity in Washington, you need to be 18 years old or over, a resident of Washington, have a terminal illness with less than 6 months expected to live, have capacity to make your own decision, have 2 doctors who will and are able to support you, and be capable of self-administering the medication. Your death certificate will state the underlying disease as the cause of death. We have data in Washington from 2009 through 2018. We don't have the 2019 data collated yet because in 2020, you may have noticed the health department was a little busy doing something else. But the data we do have, the age ranges from 18 to 104. Most of the patients had a cancer-related diagnosis, but several others had ALS, COPD, heart disease, or some neurological other illnesses. The most successful death with dignity patients have a plan. They planned ahead. So they have a prescription available at the pharmacy if they need it. And as I said, 25% have relieved their anxiety so much that they don't ever fill the prescription. The process is a 15-day period that begins with a formal oral request for medical aid in dying, and ends with the writing of the prescription. Unfortunately, about 40 to 50% of the people who call End of Life Washington and have heard about death with dignity, they've heard about it so late that they die before they can use the process. And many of them are suffering and do not have a good death. If you think you might ever want to exercise this right, talk to your healthcare providers or End of Life Washington in advance. This is Christine Fong and her 2 daughters. In 2004, Christine was diagnosed with bone cancer. She battled with radiation treatments that left her drained and lifeless for a year. Fortunately, she was in remission for 12 years, but she never forgot her anguish and mental and physical side effects. When it came back 12 years later, she did not want treatment. She learned of the Washington Death with Dignity Act and said, "This is what I want." She needed to find the right physicians. So with family and End of Life Washington, she persevered and found doctors. She planned her final days surrounded by the people she loved. Any questions about death with dignity before we move on to the next thing? Okay. Next slide. Sometimes death with dignity is not an option. A person may not qualify as being terminal, but may have a disease with a long trajectory like ALS or Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. For those folks, there's another option that's called VSED. VSED stands for Voluntary Stopping of Eating and Drinking. It's a natural death that's been practiced by many cultures for centuries, and it's a natural part of the dying process. VSED is legal. It's a voluntary choice to hasten one's death. However, it shouldn't be taken lightly. It requires a good plan and support. The support and collaboration are crucial. You need comfort measures and help from hospice and doctors. And while you may not qualify for hospice when you begin VSED, once you do begin the process, you are considered terminal and can then be enrolled in hospice. So you can get that lined up ahead of time and then officially become enrolled once you've started the process. So let me tell you about Jeff. In 2015, Jeff was diagnosed with progressive nuclear palsy, which causes pain and severe problems with walking, sight, and swallowing. At the age of 64, he was a lover of reading, great food, and good wine, and he was not willing to live with this. He wouldn't qualify with death with dignity for many years, but he would be able to choose VSED when and if his pain became unmanageable. In the winter of 2017, Jeff reached that point. His disease was uncompromising. He was suffering. And on April 13th, with the support of caregivers, family, and friends, he began his choice to voluntarily stop eating and drinking. He never complained. He never changed his mind. He was on a path to die well, and that is exactly how it happened. At End of Life Washington, we've supported many clients through the VSED process. It takes an average of 7 to 10 days to die with the right support and good collaboration with physicians and care teams. The experience almost always is peaceful for the patient and their support teams. And there's listed on the slide 8 different diagnoses of clients that we have worked with. And we're seeing more people choose VSED in the earlier stages of dementia to avoid losing quality of life. For example, in the late 1980s and 1990s, Jean sat beside both of her parents as they died. Her mother deteriorated over the years due to Alzheimer's disease. It was devastating to watch with her wither away. Later, her father voluntarily chose VSED to end his suffering from cancer and died peacefully. The contrast between the two approaches couldn't have been greater. After her father died, Jean said out loud, "That's how I want to die." When Jean was diagnosed with Lewy body and Alzheimer's dementia, she knew she would follow in her father's footsteps. At 73, her dementia was increasing and the window of opportunity would soon close. She had had 2 years to plan and prepare, and emotionally, she was ready. She drafted a letter documenting her choice, told her physician and hospice team it was time, and gathered her family and friends. Without suffering, with comfort measures in place, and loved ones present, Jean died just as her father had, on her own terms. Before the disease stole her consciousness and quality of life, she was able to take her final breath in peace. So basically, with dementia, you have choices. Advanced directives and dementia directives give legal guidance. Pulsed forms give medical orders. In the early stages, while you still have capacity, VSET is an option. And in later stages, instructions for feeding and drinking and comfort feeding only plans can be resources for your caregivers. Any questions on VSET before I move on? Silence.
It's a lot to take in, so we'll
It really is.
let people absorb a little.
I just
and
heard about VSED for the first time less than 2 years ago, a good 3 years after I retired from practicing medicine.
You know,
Go ahead, Kathy.
I guess I do have a question. We didn't do anything formally, but my mother was on hospice and she essentially stopped eating. And she went, because you were quoting 1 to 2 weeks, she went 22 days without any food and almost no liquid before passing. Is that common?
Yeah, that would be to be expected if she was also taking in some liquid.
Yeah, that's the difficult part about VSED is that the recommendations are if you're committed to voluntarily making this choice to hasten death, you would want to eliminate all hydration because that will help hasten the death. If you're taking in some liquid, it might still be comfortable and that could be, your choice, but it may then lengthen the amount of time that it would take. And if she's in late stages, then, it's up to the care team and the directives to be helpful in how you decide how much hydration is being given.
Yeah, I see. Our
And
problem,
that sounds like a
she couldn't talk and then that happened all of a sudden. And so, you can ask her questions and she could nod, but there's kind of a limit to how much, you can ask and say, do you want any food? And she says, no, you don't give it to her. But the hospice nurses, I always felt were pushing the food more than they should have been.
Yeah, that's definitely a complication, which is the possibility that's offered by the instructions for oral feeding and drinking documents, because if it's something you're thinking about ahead of time before you reach that late stage, you can say that if I'm saying I don't want to eat, then I'd like to eliminate everything in the hopes of hastening death. But that's a decision you'd either have to make clear or make your values around those topics clear to the healthcare agent proxy person that you've chosen so that they can help with those decisions.
Nancy?
I have a question
My friend
Oh.
Ruth Kirk had a very public death with dignity. And the key was the water, the drinking. She quit drinking and eating, but it took just 5 days. I thought that was kind of good to know.
Yeah. And that's typical for somebody who's reached some stage of illness or frailty or other challenge that they would pass more quickly. That's it.
Nancy?
I have a question about the death certificate. So then would it read the underlying illness, or do you die of starvation or dehydration?
no, the underlying illness is what should be put on the death certificate.
But that furthers the point that you should talk to your physicians ahead of time so that they know that that would be your preference. I think there have been times where doctors did put dehydration, but it could and should read the underlying disease or challenges that you're having.
Okay.
We can
Okay.
move on to our next section and then we'll come back.
Yeah,
for
we're
more
pretty
questions.
much ready to wrap it up. As I said before, the most important step is planning ahead. Know who can and will support you. Have conversations about your choices and wishes. You want to be sure your durable power attorney is comfortable with death with dignity or VSED, should those be options you may want to choose. If you want the option to use the Death with Dignity Act or to choose VSED, you want to know if your doctor or clinic will or can support you. Ask a specific question. For example, and there's many ways or many things you may want to find out, but a very specific question would be, if I had a terminal illness and wanted to use Death with Dignity, would you be willing and able to write me a medical aid in dying prescription? Some offices and hospitals have restrictive policies and can't do so. And End of Life Washington can help find supportive physicians if need be. It's my personal opinion that if patients keep asking this question, more physicians will eventually become cooperative. So I would encourage you to ask it. And next year, if the answer was no, ask it again. And the following year, ask it again. And if they ask you, why do you keep asking me this question? Say, well, I'm hoping that you might change your mind. Again, just my opinion. In addition to your healthcare team, End of Life Washington has volunteer client advisors and volunteer medical advisors to help navigate these processes. And the volunteer medical advisors are physicians that could maybe help your physician through the process if they're willing, but unfamiliar and don't know how to do it. You also might want to consider looking for a death doula to support you in planning. Rachel, is there anything else about this slide you want to point out?
Yeah, I think it's really important to just remind people that because we want, and because a lot of people want everyone to have an advance directive, you just need the 2 witnesses or a notary. You don't have to do that through your lawyer or have a physician involved. If you don't want to, you can do that on your own with the notary or with 2 witnesses. But then for post or, in the processes of refusing treatment or being signed up for hospice care, you'll need a physician to help with that part of the process. And if you do choose Death with Dignity or medical aid in dying, you'll need 2 supportive physicians. So that's why we're really encouraging you to have those conversations with the doctors ahead of time. And if you do choose voluntary stopping eating and drinking, it's highly recommended to have a physician who will support you in the process, potentially prescribing comfort type medications that can help through the difficulties you could encounter. But it's not required in that case, right? It's a voluntary choice to do that. You can do that on your own, but strongly encourage support for that. But then there's all these other kinds of supporters that can help you in different ways through any of these decisions and processes that you might encounter.
Also, make sure you have documented your wishes. Check the boxes. Identify physicians and care supporters or care teams that are supportive of your choices. Complete advanced directives. Evaluate when you might need a post form. Provide copies of the advanced directives to your support team. And most important, discuss your end of life wishes with your loved ones. Next. That's a new slide.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to tell you. So we moved some things. So we encourage you to consider all of these other areas of end of life planning, but these are not things that End of Life Washington directly provides resources for. We have some links. The person on the call, now I'm blanking on name, who has the Wonder file. Some of these items are in there from some of our partner organizations. But if you're not familiar, People's Memorial Association is a statewide nonprofit that has some really helpful resources for a number of these kinds of end of life planning topics too. So we highly recommend you check those out. And we do have this Wonder file resource on our website, which is a list of kind of many of the documents that connect to some of these topics as well.
My personal favorite is to make sure you have a list of your accounts and passwords somewhere so that whoever's left behind can find your assets and pay your bills. Next.
And
So-
so, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, End of Life Washington's website is very robust and has a wealth of resources. And if you're not able to use a website, you can call the office and we'll send you paper files and materials and or links. And there are also newsletters and updates that you can subscribe to.
Yeah, so if you want to sign up for our news, you can go to this link directly, and I'll put these links again in the follow-up resources. And if you have trouble finding, our website has so many PDF resources on it that sometimes people have challenges finding the right one. So definitely feel free to email or call us if you have challenges finding the thing you need.
I call Rachel all the time.
And then go ahead, Connie, do you want to, you want to share?
I was
this?
just going to say, help us educate others. If you found any of this helpful, share it with friends, loved ones, or any other organizations that you belong to, so we can have more people in the state be end of life ready and have a chance at a peaceful death. We have physicians, we have volunteers, and we are 100% supported by donations. But my appeal to you is we need volunteers. In Eastern Washington, I mentioned that we have 70 volunteer client advisors or more. At least 60 of them are on the wet side of the mountains. I'm one of 2, Becky is the other, in the corridor from Clarkston to Spokane to the Canadian border. We have 1 in Wenatchee, we have 3 in the Methow Valley, but as far as we know, we have nobody in Yakima or South Central Washington, and we would really love to have some volunteers in that part of the state. And we will provide extensive training and mentorship. We would not leave you all alone. So if you are at all interested, or you know somebody that might be, please call the office.
Definitely. So thank you so much for your time and for all that listening. We will take any additional questions or conversation and have plenty of time for that, I think.
Put that slide up with your website and phone number,
Sure.
put that on again.
Yep, I'll do that. Just a second.
Also, I was wondering,
There should be a handout following up, Susie, with the
Oh.
information too. Yeah.
you're gonna send that out. Okay, okay. If your primary care provider is a nurse practitioner, can they do all these things? Or do you have to have a physician?
The death with dignity law part requires either a MD or DO to write the prescription and sign the consulting forms and take the formal requests. So the answer there is no. Depending on where he or she works, they might have a supervising or available physician that they would do the work, but the physician would do the signing. A lot of these other things nurse practitioners can do. I don't know about the post form,
I don't know specifically about that either.
but it probably says right on the form.
We can look at that.
But your provider would know that. Yeah.
Mary Lou's has hers ready, so she can check. But yes, in the Washington State Legislature this year, we tried to pass a law to expand access so that nurse practitioners could be one of the signers on a death with dignity process, but that unfortunately didn't make it all the way through both houses. So we'll keep working on that because more and more people, especially in rural areas, have nurse practitioners or physician's assistants as their primary care. So we definitely are working to increase that possibility.
This says physician ARNP-PA-C. So it's
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
So it could be any of those. Yeah,
assistant can do it. Yeah.
Pulse form. Okay.
yeah, great. Thanks.
So I have a question with VSED. So you said something, so a person, if they're terminal and they choose voluntarily VSED, stopping eating and drinking, and then you're saying at a later point, they would be eligible for the medications. What would be the holdup before? Well, I kind of missed something.
Yeah. Okay. So there's not really a holdup for medications from your physician or your nurse practitioner to provide comfort support. But many people who choose VSED are not terminal to the degree that they have a 6 life 6-month or less life expectancy, and so therefore they're not eligible for hospice
Or for
But-
death with dignity.
Okay.
yeah.
or for death with dignity. But yeah, the question was about VSED. If you get a hospice team lined up and say, this is what I'm going to do, and if they're supportive, then they'll sort of like lie in wait for you to begin the VSED process, hopefully with some medication support from your provider. And then once you're 2 or 3 days into that process, then your death is inevitable and you meet the criteria, and then they can enroll you in hospice.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sounds
great.
a little crazy, but that's how it works.
No, right. And I have seen that. Yes. Okay. Right. That makes sense now.
When you say comfort measures, are you talking about things like oxycodone, morphine, and some sort of tranquilizer or something like that? What are you meaning when you say comfort measures?
Could be some of those things. Yeah. Go ahead, Connie.
I would, in my mind, I think it's mostly anti-anxiety medication, and perhaps some sleep medication. And then there's a whole long list of various things to deal with thirst that involve oral care.
Oh, okay, like the pink sponges and things
Yeah.
like. Okay.
Yeah. So the symptoms of thirst can be managed with some good oral hygiene and some resources that they can use that don't add hydration to your system, so that it's not counteracting your hopes for the VSED process.
Okay.
Would any of you,
Go ahead.
or anyone in the audience care to talk about the experience of family members during the process of death with dignity and afterwards?
Sounds like you're offering that you have some experience, Donna.
I do. I'm not sure I have much to say right here, but
Okay.
I'm just interested in other, and I should have said family and friends.
I'll tell you about a really close friend of mine. So this is somebody that I didn't work with as a volunteer. But she was extremely fortunate in a very tragic, horrible situation. At the age of around 70, I believe, she was diagnosed with ALS. And she was fortunate enough to have a neurologist who, on the second visit, also told her about death with dignity options and various end-of-life choices, both to let her know what was available to her and also to let her know that he or she would be supportive when the time came. And she had a horrible form of ALS, deteriorated very rapidly, had a very wonderful supportive family and group of friends, and was able to end her life at just the point at which it was going to become untenable. She was unable to talk, unable to eat, unable to speak, and had no visible means of joy of life at the point at which she used death with dignity. And it was a blessing for all of us.
Several members of my family were given shots, and by a family member who was qualified to do that. But the person who lived on for several hours and then died. Can you tell us anything about that?
I have no idea what that might have been, but the death with dignity law requires that it be an oral ingestion of,
Is that right?
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure they were given shots.
Well, there's people that do all kinds of things that are outside
of the realm of.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Was that in the state of Washington, Delma?
In Idaho was one, and yes, one in Washington.
I live in Idaho. Weird stuff goes on over here.
But yeah, that would be outside of the realm of what End of Life Washington would be, supporting and
Right.
The son was a doctorate of psychology, and he was given permission to give her the shot with all the family there.
One thing I can add to this conversation, having worked in a hospital for 40 some years, just to encourage the people in the audience to fill out these documents. I have witnessed terrible family rows over end of life decisions for a loved one. There's often dissension among surviving family members about what to do. And if there's no instruction, it can really cause terrible division.
Yep.
I'm sure you've seen that, Susie.
Yep.
Plan ahead, plan ahead.
Plan ahead, plan ahead. Yep, that's right.
I've got a question. Can you talk to us about what do client advisors from End of Life Washington do?
Go for it, Connie.
I was going to say the same thing to you. To distill it into one sentence, it's to help clients navigate, and their families or loved ones navigate end-of-life choices and the death with dignity law specifically. So a big part of the job is we get a client who wants to pursue death with dignity and has reached some sort of roadblock or obstacles. And so we help them navigate those obstacles and find a path to their choice. And
Okay, so you encourage us to try to do it on our own, but if we run into obstacles, then we can contact you and get a client advisor who helps us through that. Is that true?
Bingo.
And does it work? Does it work no matter where we are in the state, even though we don't have volunteers here, we can still get that help?
The miracle of Zoom has opened up all kinds of
I
possibilities.
agree, it is a miracle. I can't tell you how happy we are that you're with us to tell us that again. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a couple VCAs who have particular experience with advanced directives, and so they might be able to follow up with a phone call for you just on that topic if it's just a question about filling out the forms or what one of the questions might mean. And then if you are facing a terminal illness or terminal diagnosis and you're interested in the possibilities of VSED or death with dignity, then you can be assigned to a volunteer client advisor to work kind of directly with you through that process, as long as you are navigating either of those processes. So it's kind of a consultation and an advisory role, and then a navigation role if you're really actively pursuing one of the two hastening death choices. That is most of our VCA work is around that process.
How difficult is it to, let's say, we're in Eastern Washington, we have the Cascade Curtain. How difficult is it to find two physicians, let's say in, Yakima County?
Connie, I don't know if we have any recent examples. I know it is definitely more challenging on the east side of the state than it is on the west side of the state. And that is one of the things we spend some time doing. Due to telemedicine and Zoom, some physicians from the west side, some of our volunteer medical advisors can be one of the signers too, so they can do some of that through telemedicine. But Connie's point, about asking your physician and talking to your physician, most physicians who maybe weren't okay with it initially, it was through patient advocacy that they became more actively involved and willing to sign off on death with dignity. So it's definitely something we're working on to expand our network of physicians, and it is one of the challenges.
So there isn't like a list lying around anywhere. I mean, you have to find, you have to talk to your family practitioner, your physician, but then, you have to go on the hunt. Yeah.
Right. And we can help you. So if you're actively facing a terminal diagnosis or somebody is, and they want to pursue this, we certainly can take you on as a client and support you in that process, but we don't distribute any list of physicians. We can just say we can help with that, and it can be challenging depending on where you live and what kind of medical system you're working with.
Would it behoove someone to do it? We say plan ahead. I know like my mother's doctor, he's absolutely would never in a million years. And she knows that. So I said, well, Mom, maybe it's time to start actively looking for a new you know, people on your team, you know, later that you know would be lined up to with your value system. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but so would that be something to kind of plan ahead to? I mean, you might have a doctor you've been going to for 20 some years, but you know they're not going to.
Yeah, there's two parts to that
Participate.
problem, because one is the physician, you know, is not going to write a medical aid and dying prescription. But the other piece is he's probably also not going to give you accurate information as to how to exercise the choices that you want to exercise. And so you need to know what kinds of hospices are in the area that you live and what kinds of policies they have. And you need to, I would, it's hard because you have a relationship with a physician and it's a very intimate relationship and it's very valuable and it's very important. And otherwise this might be, you know, somebody she really trusts. But there wouldn't be anything wrong with trying to get to know other options that are available to her and see if there might be a better fit.
And one of our volunteer medical advisors recently said in a different conversation, like, you know, it's best to change doctors while you're still healthy or while you're not facing a really serious illness, because if you're in the midst of a kind of medical crisis, it will be even much more difficult to change physicians at that point. I mean, we can help find somebody who will consult and potentially sign off, but it would be potentially easier to find that supportive physician before you reach that point.
Yeah.
Most of the physicians that I know reasonably well are also associated with the University of Washington in some capacity. And I've never asked them, I will next time. I'd be really shocked if any of them said no. I know that there would be some in ACMA who would say that, but I don't really think it's as hard as people are suggesting it might be.
Yeah, and it can be up to the individual, right? So the Death with Dignity law specifically safeguards physicians who are personally opposed to it, that they are, you know, never going to be required to sign a prescription for medical aid and dying if they don't want to. So it could be both personal, and then it can also be health system and health facility policies that can also limit them. So there's kind of two layers to that, and it could be one or the other or both, or they could be fully able to and willing to. So there's all the possibilities, but until you ask, it's hard to know for sure.
But the University of Washington medical system does not have any institutional barriers.
As far as
what I'm saying, these are people who you know, guide residents, and perhaps their approach to some of these things are less conservative than some other people. But
does anybody know whether Pacific Northwest University has, if they're a possible resource in this way, or what their views are?
Good question.
You know, we have an osteopathic medical school in town that's very well regarded. Yeah, I don't, you know, it might be interesting to find out. Maybe Marge could help us.
Yeah.
Did you have something?
Yeah, I have one other comment or question. So I have a friend who has a brother that has colon cancer, and he's been kind of maintaining. Well, she thinks that he's being euphemistic because he says he's having palliative care, but she thinks he just doesn't want to say he's in hospice. But I'm saying there's a difference between hospice and palliative care, but she's not quite buying it. So maybe you could, you know, I mean, I know what hospice is because my husband was in hospice, and you know, it was, you know, I understand the six, but she thinks she's not seeing the difference between the two. So maybe you could talk a little bit about palliative care.
Well, the care that you receive isn't really different. So you could say that hospice care and palliative care are the same thing in terms of what you receive, because there's all these resources. The difference is in the definition and primarily in reimbursement. Medicare will reimburse hospice care, but may not, depending on your plan, reimburse palliative care.
So that's up to the plan.
Yeah,
Okay.
And if you were going through treatment,
Thank
you
you.
can't go
Yeah.
through any kind, you can't be going through chemotherapy or whatever if you're on hospice. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's my understanding. In hospice, you're not having any more medical treatment. But
Yeah.
in palliative care, you could have maybe some little bit of maintenance treatment. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my mother's case, evidently this was last August that she passed. Fairly recently to that, you could state, what do you call it? Failure to strive or something like that. And that Medicare would use that and pay for hospice for that. And because my mother probably had been in that state for a couple of years to some extent before this minor stroke happened. But when she had hers, which was a year ago, June, they said that Medicare had just taken that off the list. And so they had to have the doctor look at the brain scan enough to say that she qualified to go on to hospice because she had enough degenerative brain changes to then say, yeah, within 6 months. And so you're right, it has a whole lot to do with money. And, you know, all this stuff is extremely expensive, and it's always useful if you fit to Medicare's little niche.
Well, we used to get very liberal with clarifying or certifying patients as being eligible for hospice because we knew that that was a way, I'm talking we physicians, we knew that was a way for patients to get really good care and to get it paid for by Medicare, and patients, and then they'd get better, and we call it graduating from hospice. And then if they, they deteriorate a couple of years later, we put them back on hospice, and the cycle would go on and on. Well, hospice kind of got, or Medicare kind of got the drift of what was going on. So they've cracked down on the criteria for which makes you eligible for hospice. And so that's what you observed happening, is it started out pretty liberal and now it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah, I've heard of people who flunked hospice.
Yes. I like to say graduated, but
Yeah, I'm gonna say graduate. Yeah, or flunk.
I'm curious about the doulas. Does Yakima have any death doulas? I know there's birth doulas.
Yeah, so we're connected to some death doulas who are part of our network as volunteers, but we're not officially, part of any doula network. So I don't know for sure, but I'm sure you could research and find out. I'm assuming there's probably one in the area, but maybe less in your particular area.
Well, and Becky is a death doula, and maybe she knows
Up in
more.
Spokane.
There are a few directories that you can consult. There's an organization called INELDA, INELDA, which is an international organization. And there's another one called NEDA, NEDA.
DA, okay.
Okay, and they both have directories. As Rachel said, you can always go online, but it can be challenging to find. But I would contact some of the schools. There are lots of training programs out there for doulas now. The field is kind of blowing up, and most schools can connect you with someone.
Oh, okay.
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 Thank
That's
you,
Becky.
Sure.
And those of us in the network who are on, bear in mind, maybe at some point we would be able to share with each other any information that we learn that might be helpful to others. So keep track of things, and we'll work, later on, we'll see if we can figure out a way to do that as long as it's voluntary to people.
Yeah, you could also invite a death doula in the future to speak more specifically to the role of death doula and all kinds of cases or
That's
situations.
a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We could do that.
Mhm.
Maybe Becky's available.
Yeah, as Becky says, it is a growing field. So I'm aware of more and more people who are receiving this kind of training and providing really helpful support in a lot of different ways as death doulas.
That's great.
I would be happy, Mary Lou, to talk to your group about
Okay.
the roles of a death doula. It can be pretty widely varied.
Okay. All right. And
But
we,
I would be happy to do a presentation on that for you.
thank you. We've got your email from having invited you, and we thank you very much. I'll get back in touch with you, Becky. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, great.
On your program, there was a little picture of the woman, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, who did the TED Talk about her mother.
Yeah.
That is a fabulous TED Talk.
Yeah. I'll send the
Anyone-
link for that. to you.
Anyone who is interested in really knowing the exact process of what goes on when someone ingests the drug and the description of her experience, it is quite poignant and I think, in my experience, very, very accurate.
Yeah. Thank you.
So you might want to watch that TED Talk if you're interested.
Good.
You said in Yakima gives you a pamphlet called Gone From My Sight.
Yeah.
And I thought it was superb because it explains this process and explains that you can't put time on how many days it's going to take before the person, starts narrowing their environment and all this kind of stuff. But it just explains it all the way through. And you can be of any faith or no faith. It's written in a way that I had several relatives read it of all different religious views, and everybody just thought it was fantastic. And
The hospice nurse that wrote Gone From My Sight, her name will be on the pamphlet, Barbara Carnes, and she has, I think 35 years she's a retired hospice nurse. She has a wealth of information, and she has a pamphlet that covers a variety of circumstances around end of life and death and grief. So her website is a great resource for that kind of thing.
yeah, I'm such a beautiful writer, and
Mhm.
it only like 10 minutes to read through it. It's like my son showed up and I said, no, you have to read this before we go to grandma's. And he was glad he did. It was that good.
So Becky, what was the last name of the person?
Carnes. It's
Carnes?
Barbara Carnes, Karnes, RN.
Yeah, Kathy shared those with me, and I agree with her. They're very helpful. Wouldn't necessarily agree with all parts of them, but they give really helpful information.
Yes.
Demystifying death and the experience that people are having.
And she really distills it. I mean, a lot of hospice nurses write books, but Barbara puts really comprehensible pamphlets, brief pamphlets together.
I mean, it's like 12 pages long or
Exactly.
something.
Yeah.
I come out of it having some feeling that you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Our hospice Cottage in the Meadow would maybe give us I know some people there. We might, if anybody wanted copies of those, they have plenty. They have a lot of them. I used to work up there, so they have a lot.
You have a very knowledgeable group with all kinds of resources. That's great.
That's because we're old.
Well, it sounds like a few of you have experience working professionally in these fields too, so it's good.
Okay, well, this has been incredibly helpful. A wonderful presentation. I'm speaking for myself, but I have a feeling I'm reflecting other people's views, and really appreciate the time you're giving us to ask questions. And as I said, I hope people take notes, and if you have questions that come up later, you could email Chrissy or one of us. We could try to, I'm going to take Becky up on finding out more about what is a death doula, what is the role of a death doula, and we'll do that sometime in the fall, probably, Becky. We're going to end our, we have one more Zoom talk coming up, but that's going to be it. So let me just profusely thank Connie and Rachel, and I'm glad you joined us as well. So we really appreciate this.
Nicely done, ladies.
Thanks for letting us practice on you.
You're welcome. Being the guinea pigs, and thanks for everybody for showing up and asking such good questions. I just have a couple quick announcements. Our last Zoom talk is going to be in 2 weeks. It's on June 16th. It's going to be Tammy Ayer from the Features and Reader Engagement Editor at the Yakima Herald. And she's going to be talking about the importance of local reporting. We're still finalizing the details on that. And this summer, we're not going to be having Zoom talks, but we are going to be having picnics in June, July, and August. And you'll be getting those dates from Chrissy. But most of our small Zoom groups are going to continue meeting, and our walking group is going to continue meeting. So we aren't going to drop off the universe. We're going to still be around. And
we're at the farmer's market
Right.
once a month.
thank you.
So
Once a month will be at the farmer's market.
Yeah.
Good
So
point.
we'll-
Thank you for bringing that up. Yep. Okay, well then we'll call it an evening, and thank you again
thanks,
so much,
everybody.
Rachel and Connie. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.